Hey everybody, this is Rycard here again, and welcome to a new Pokemon Teams video. Today's video is going to be featuring my PU Tailwind team that I've pretty much been using for almost the entirety of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon's lifespan. And this team has been a ton of fun to put together and use, and I have had a lot of success laddering with it as well. To kind of showcase the team of it, as you can see from the team preview here, we're going to be using both Volbeat and Illumise, which are kind of the tag team bug types from Generation 3, which is one of the fun things that I also wanted to do when building this team. This is actually how the team started, was that I wanted to use both of these Pokemon simultaneously, and it just evolved into even more than I could have ever expected. But along with that, we're going to be using Aggron, Jynx, Oricorio Pom-Pom form, and Poliwrath. And this team as a whole really does play very offensively, which is something that I typically don't generally gravitate to when I'm playing Pokemon. So this was a very big change for me in terms of playstyle, but it was a lot of fun and something that I had a ton of enjoyment building and using in the various battles that I have, played with this particular team. So to get into a little bit more about this team, let's go ahead and talk about some of the pros and cons of using this team in the PU tier. So when talking about this team, one of the main things to consider is that this team is a very unique playstyle, and it's very offensive, and it is centered around Tailwind. And all of that in combination with itself is really something that makes this team stand out from a lot of other teams that I've used and even built, because it is a style that I haven't really ever done before, and it's something that I feel like a lot of people also really haven't fully explored, trying to make an entire team around. And Tailwind, for those that don't know, is a move that sets up a Tailwind on the battlefield for about 3 turns. It's technically 4, but the first turn that you set it up also counts as one of those turns. So really it's 3 in singles at least. And it basically doubles your Pokemon's speed stat for that many turns, which in turn allows you to be much faster on the battlefield than you normally would be. And because of this, the games in and of themselves are very fast, and they usually last around less than 20 turns, because you're basically trying to hit things as hard as you can, as quickly as you possibly can. So if you're not, wanting to play a team that's going to be very long and drawn out, this basically will be decided within a few turns if you're going to win or lose, which is something to just keep in mind. So it's just a kind of a cool little thing because it doesn't take a lot of time to use. The next thing is that it's capable of holding its own in the upper part of the ladder, and I mentioned before, but I've peaked with this team at 18th on the ladder when kind of laddering very seriously. I probably could have gone higher. In fact, when I did peak at 18th, there are actually a few things in the tier that aren't in the tier anymore, such as like Mesprit, which is when I peaked at 18th, which was eventually banned from PU. So this team, in theory, could do even better than it previously did. The next thing also is that it can match up very well against different types of stall if played correctly, primarily due to the fact that this team hits so hard that a lot of physical walls can actually just be beaten by how hard Aggron hits in and of itself, which is one of the really cool things about this team. So it can work against stall very well, and I even have another Pokemon on this team that's kind of designed to deal with most types of stall in and of itself, which is very good. Also, it can completely invalidate rain teams a lot of the time, namely due to Oricorio and Tailwind in and of itself, because basically you have a 100% accurate Hurricane while also having the speed boost from Tailwind, and a lot of rain teams cannot handle that, in addition to the electric type coverage that Revelation Dance gives you. And this also works pretty well against Sun as well, but to a lesser extent. And the last thing also is that this team has a ton of comeback potential, because if you have at least one Pokemon that can set up Tailwind and one sweeper, you can very easily win a game even with only 2 Pokemon left because of how hard your team hits. So that is something to keep in mind, even when it feels like you might be losing. If you sacrifice something for the benefit of setting up Tailwind, you can still win games even with very little left on your team. In addition to this, though, there are some things about this team that do make it not work as well. And one of the biggest things is that this is a very, very frail team with not a lot of resists. So it's very likely that more often than not, you're not going to really have a good switch in to a lot of attacks on your opponent's team. The other thing is also that setting up hazards and removing them can be difficult because of the fact that you generally have to choose between doing that or setting up Tailwind or hitting really hard. So it kind of is a debate every single time you have the opportunity. Should I set up hazards or should I kill something? Or should I remove hazards or should I set up Tailwind? So there's a lot that kind of goes on with this, but it has the ability to do both if it needs to. It's just kind of one of those difficult decisions to make when using it. The other thing is that there is some stall that this team cannot deal with, and it's namely things that incorporate both Quagsire and Tangela, because they just kind of invalidate some of this team if played correctly. So those two Pokemon in particular are very hard to deal with on the same team with other stally type Pokemon as well. The other thing also to keep in mind is that Mudsdale is also very difficult a lot of the time to switch into and deal with, and because Mudsdale will oftentimes invalidate Aggron completely, it generally is a huge problem for this team. The other thing is that when Tailwind is not up, this team is very slow, so it's very likely that you're going to get outsped by a lot of stuff that is very fast and other Scarfers. The other thing is also that if people are very familiar with how Volbeat and Illumise work, they can be very predictable to play around and thus kind of get invalidated a bit in what they're trying to do, because your opponent will be able to predict around them very easily. But the last and kind of most important thing about this team is that it relies on a lot of moves that do not have perfect accuracy to do damage, and as a result, it causes you oftentimes to miss moves that will cost you a game. That is part of the fun in some aspects, because you never know what's going to happen, but it can be very frustrating because when you could be winning a game, if your attack hit, oftentimes you will lose it when it misses. So do keep that in mind and make sure that you are just aware of the risk reward of the attacks that you're using. So with that, let's get into the first Pokemon that I'm going to talk about on this team, which is going to be Volbeat. So Volbeat is the first Tailwind setter of this team, and in a sense, my physical wall. And that seems really bizarre because most people don't even think to use this Pokemon this way. But its bug typing is actually really good for a lot of things, even in that fact that it actually can take a lot of hits for neutral damage. It isn't weak to a ton of stuff, but more specifically, it allows you a very solid way of dealing with Primeape, which is one of the most common Pokemon in the PU tier. Volbeat being a bug type obviously resists fighting moves, and that's very, very important for why this Pokemon is so useful. But the set that we're running is a physically defensive one, so we're going to run an Impish nature to increase its physical defense, but lower its special attack, and then we're going with its Prankster ability, because this lets it use all of its non-attacking moves with a +1 priority, essentially allowing you the ability to use Tailwind no matter what, and that's kind of how this Pokemon came about being used. Additionally, we're going to be running an EV spread of 248 HP, 252 physical defense, and 8 speed EVs, essentially allowing this Pokemon to be as physically bulky as possible, and also, when a Tailwind is not up, allow it to outspeed other base 85 speed Pokemon that it would be normally speed tying with. But for the moveset in and of itself, obviously Tailwind is there because that's the whole point. But additionally, we're going to be running Encore on this Pokemon. And this is one of the best moves that this Pokemon actually has access to. And this set in particular for this Pokemon is probably just amazing by itself. It doesn't even have to be used on this team. But Encore allows you to trap your opponents into moves that they have already gone for multiple turns so that they keep using that move again and again. This is more so specifically useful against Pokemon that are trying to set up, and there are quite a few Pokemon that like to Shell Smash in the PU tier. If you switch Volbeat in when they Shell Smash, you can effectively force them to just Shell Smash forever, and then you can switch out into something else. The way that you do that typically, though, is going to be through the use of U-Turn. It's your only attack on the set, but it is stab, and it is also a physical attack, which Volbeat has the better physical attack of the two bugs. So this move in and of itself does a bit of damage, which is nice, and it allows you, obviously, a free way of switching into another Pokemon on your team. The last move, though, that we're going to be going with is going to be Thunder Wave, and this is great if you don't necessarily need to set up Tailwind, but would rather paralyze something. And this turns out to be very useful also sometimes in combination with Tailwind, because you can paralyze especially fast things that still outspeed your Pokemon even when the Tailwind is up, like Primeape. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too when I get to Aggron. But the item for this Pokemon is probably the most unique aspect of it, which is an eject button. And what this does is it basically forces Volbeat out of the battle when it takes damage. And this is really cool because you can essentially set up Tailwind for free and get an immediate switch out into something else to make use of Tailwind right away. And this in particular is amazing against like things that are going to go for U-turn or Volt Switch or stuff like that, because it cancels out the switching of U-turn and Volt Switch from your opponent, and you actually switch out instead. So why this is particularly effective is because it essentially allows you a free switch into something on your team to take advantage of Tailwind, which more often than not is going to be Aggron. And this Pokemon is just one of the best things about this team in and of itself, but obviously we have Illumise to complement it. So to talk a little bit about Illumise, this is actually the specially defensive bug, And the reason why I'm running it this way is because it allows this Pokemon to switch into a variety of special moves and just be able to handle those attacks fairly well. The set is going to be incredibly similar to the Volbeat one. In fact, they're running almost identical movesets, but having two Pokemon do that on the same team is actually awesome, because if one goes down, you still have the other to do the exact same thing. So for this particular moveset, we're going to be running a Careful Nature to increase its special defense but lower its special attack, and then we're going to obviously go with the Prankster ability again. But for the EV spread this time, since it's specially defensive, we're going to be running 248 HP, 252 special defense EVs, and 8 speed to give it its maximum special bulk possible. And for this Pokemon, the only difference is that we're running Defog on it instead of Thunderwave. And Defog obviously is there because it allows you to remove hazards, and this is incredibly important to have for this team because there are 3 Pokemon actually that are weak to Stealth Rock on it. So this is one of those moves that when you can use it, you definitely have to try to, because getting rid of those hazards is super duper important. But it also has obviously Tailwind, Encore, and U-Turn, and I want to specifically talk about Encore on this Pokemon as well, because what you can do is if you ever find yourself in a situation where you can freely switch between Volbeat and Illumise, you can essentially Encore something, U-Turn out into the other thing, U-turn back out into the other thing, and then U-turn again, and then Encore it with the other bug, and then continuously do that until your opponent eventually decides to switch out, which is kind of amazing. That's one of my favorite things about this team as well. But for a little bit more survivability on this particular Pokemon, we're going to run Leftovers. I really wish there was a way to incorporate Roost into this set, but I couldn't really figure out a way to unless I dropped something else. If I had to, I would drop Encore for that, but either way, this Pokemon can survive at least long enough to at least set up a Tailwind, which is the main focus of using this Pokemon. Up next, we have what is, in my opinion, probably the real star of the team, which is Aggron. The reason why I picked this Pokemon really is just because I slowly started to realize the more that I played PU, that Choice Banded Head Smash off of Aggron is completely busted in this tier. Like, it kills, at least one-shots, like 90% of the PU tier by itself. And when I was building this team, I was like thinking to myself, you know, how great would it be if not only I could be choice banded, but also have my speed doubled? And that's essentially how this set came about. It's a fairly standard set, but using it in the way that it is being used, I think, is something fairly unique. Prior to Aggron, I actually had a Guts Ursaring in the exact same spot, which does very similar things, because Facade Guts Boosted is ridiculously powerful as well. So it's something to possibly consider if you want to make a similar team of your own. But for this moveset, we're going to run Jolly for as much speed as possible, the ability Rock Head to make it so that we don't take any recoil from Head Smash, and then an EV spread of 252 attack, 4 defense, and 252 speed EVs to give it its maximum physical attack and speed possible. And for the item, obviously, as I mentioned before, we're going to be running a Choice Band to boost our physical attack further by 1 stage while locking us into a move. But the moveset for this Pokemon is going to be incorporating Stealth Rock to set up hazards, Head Smash, Heavy Slam, and then either Earthquake or Aqua Tail. I've messed around with both. I can't really figure out which one is better as your last move slot. And this set in and of itself is just incredibly powerful. But what I was talking about before with the hazards thing is that more often than not, it's not actually worth it to go with Stealth Rock on this Pokemon because you can Head Smash. And you can probably kill something when you Head Smash, so is it really worth setting up hazards? I don't know. And that's what makes using this Pokemon in particular kind of a little bit tricky, because you have to kind of decide more often than not which one you're going to want to go with. But the combination of Head Smash and Heavy Slam in and of itself kind of destroys most of PU. And then the coverage move of Earthquake or Aqua Tail is really up to you. Certain things can deal with you better depending on which one you have, but Aqua Tail does allow you to more or less deal with Mudsdale, which is typically a Pokemon that gives Aggron a ton of trouble. And with Aqua Tail, you can almost two-shot it because of obviously the stamina boost, but if it has any prior damage, Aqua Tail will be really, really good. The thing about that, though, is then your opponent can switch into something to resist the Aqua Tail, and obviously that, causes further prediction and, the battle goes on and so forth. But it's just important to note that this Pokemon isn't kind of the end-all be-all destroyer of PU. There are some things that can take it and make it very difficult. The other thing also to keep in mind, which I wanted to mention also, is that Aggron, even at +2, does not outspeed Scarf Primeape. So you do have to be very conscious of that when using this Pokemon, because you still will not outspeed one of the most common Scarfers in the tier. So be mindful of that, as obviously a close combat will one-shot you. Up next, we have Jynx, which is the 4th Pokemon on this team, and really your main special attacker that can kind of more often than not be your best option for a lead Pokemon when using it. So for this particular set, we're actually going to go Modest, which is something that I normally never do. I normally always go Speed, but we're going to need the extra power for one specific thing that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So Modest will boost our special attack below our physical attack, and then we're actually going to go with the Oblivious ability, because it makes it so that we can't be taunted when we're trying to Lovely Kiss stuff. And this is actually come into play a lot. Still, Dry Skin is a good option, but I have actually had more success with Oblivious, interestingly enough. But for the EVs, we're going to run max special attack with 252 special attack EVs, and also max our speed for what it is with 252 speed EVs, and then put the remainder 4 EVs into its defense. And for the moves on the set, as I mentioned before, Lovely Kiss is going to be one of the main things that this team has to put your opponent to sleep. The thing also about Lovely Kiss, though, is that its accuracy is not amazing, so you do have to keep that in mind. I have lost so many games because I have missed Lovely Kiss. I will just I just throw that out there so you all know, because this move is so good but so unreliable simultaneously. There are so many times when I wish that it would hit when it didn't, and if you lose Jynx, that's really bad for your team, because this Pokemon actually, with just its type coverage, can kind of hit really hard and really often hit something super effectively with what it has. So we're going to go with Psychic, Ice Beam, and Focus Blast as your 3 attacks. You can also go with Psyshock, which is better for Hitmonchan specifically, but more often than not, Psychic is a better option that I've realized when using this. So if you're really worried about Hitmonchan, go with Psyshock, but otherwise just go with Psychic. Ice Beam, obviously, to be your main stab, Ice move, and then Focus Blast, which I hate because it's super inaccurate. But to kind of compensate for that, we're going to be running Fightinium Z to give you a really, really powerful fighting type move for a one-time use. And this is really important, and the main reason why is because this allows us to one-shot Regirock sometimes. For some reason, Regirock is just the bulkiest freaking thing in the world. So even a super effective Fightinium Z still will not always kill Regirock, but it is one of the most common stealth rockers in the tier, so you just kind of have to gamble with that sometimes, because when Regirock is still around, it gives your Aggron problems with killing it. So just keep that in mind. It's there for that. It also, though, helps out significantly against Audino, which is one of the most common walls in the tier. So this move in and of itself is really, really good. It's also very unexpected. I'm not sure why, but most people don't really expect Focus Blast on Jynx, which I don't really understand because it's a really good coverage option, especially though with Fightinium Z. So you do have to keep this in mind. It's a great surprising move. It hits incredibly hard, and it works against quite a few things that really are counters to some of the other Pokemon on your team. So do keep this in mind when using it, but when you don't have access to Fightinium Z, you have to rely on Focus Blast's accuracy, and that can sometimes lead you to lose a game. So do keep that in mind. But Jynx overall is probably one of the best special attackers in the tier, in my opinion, and on this team it works incredibly well to support the other Pokemon. As for the 5th Pokemon, we have Oricorio Pom-Pom, and this is kind of one of the more unique aspects of this team as well, because more often than not in the PU tier, you're going to be running the Ghost one instead of the Electric one, but it just so happens that the Electric one works perfectly for this particular team. So we're going to be running it pretty much as a standard special attacker. So we're going to run it with the Timid nature to increase its speed but lower its physical attack, run the Dancer ability because you have to, and then an EV spread of 252 special attack, 4 special defense, and 252 speed EVs to give it its maximum special attack and speed possible. The other thing about Oricorio that makes it unique is that it's the 3rd setter of Tailwind on this team. Now, more often than not, you don't actually need to use Tailwind with this Pokemon, but when you do, it's so handy because you have an additional way of setting that up so that you can switch into something else on your team, or even just use Oricorio's power to kill something. In addition to this, though, we're going to be running Revelation Dance and Hurricane as our main attacks. Obviously, both are being stabbed, Revelation Dance turning into the electric type for this particular Pokemon, and Hurricane just being a great, powerful flying type move. And additionally, with this set, we're going to be running Flyinium Z. Now, I know that seems weird because you can only use one Z move per game, but more often than not, you're not going to need both. So when it matters, Flyinium Z is incredibly important to have. When it doesn't matter, you want to use the Focus Blast with Jynx. And otherwise, Hurricane obviously is another one of those slightly inaccurate moves, so do be careful when using it, but it is a great move because flying type attacks are very good offensively in general, as there's really only a couple of things that resist it. Lastly, though, we're going to be running U-Turn because having that added ability to switch in and out of battle is incredibly useful, especially after you've set up a Tailwind, so that is important to note as well. Just like with Volbeat and Illumise, you can U-Turn out to something else if you need to. But overall, this Pokemon is one of the main reasons why Rain teams just completely lose to this team, because with Tailwind and with a 100% Hurricane in Rain, and Revelation Dance hitting most of those water types super effectively, you basically have a way of just invalidating Rain, which is very cool and makes this a particularly awesome Pokemon to use for that reason. Finally, for the last Pokemon in this video, we have Poliwrath, which is running a very, very weird set that is essentially designed to beat Stall by itself when it is able to. So this set essentially is designed to become very powerful and also wear things down over time that you cannot physically beat yourself. And I noticed over time that not only does the water fighting typing help a lot in that particular department, but it also just makes this Pokemon a really hard Pokemon to kill if you're able to set up with it. So for starters, we're going to be running a Jolly Nature to boost its speed but lower its special attack. And we're going to be going with the water absorbability. And then for the EVs, we're actually going to be maxing HP and speed to make this Pokemon quite a bit bulkier, while also obviously not sacrificing anything in terms of its potential to outspeed opponents. This is also particularly useful because obviously under Tailwind, you want to be as fast as possible if you need to be, so this will allow Poliwrath to pretty much outspeed most Scarfers and hit with its relatively powerful attacks by itself with no investment. So 252 HP, 4 special defense, and 252 speed is the EV spread that I have decided to go with this particular set. I could see less HP, a little bit more attack if you want to, but this is just what I've gone with, and it's been very successful. For the moveset, though, that I'm talking about, we're going to be running Substitute, Bulk Up, Waterfall, and Toxic. So essentially, we're getting behind a sub to protect us from attacks and statuses. We're bulking up to increase our physical defense and also our physical attack so that we can hit harder and take physical hits way better, which is something that this team can sometimes struggle with. And then we're running Waterfall as our only attacking move. Now, this can seem a little bit problematic against other things that may potentially be immune to water type attacks like Poliwrath itself, but also other Pokemon that resist this, such as Tangela. But the reason why this is particularly useful is because you can flinch with Waterfall. And when you do get a flinch with Waterfall, it's absolutely amazing. It works so much in your favor, especially if you also have a Toxic on your opponent as well. And Toxic is essentially there to wear down everything that Waterfall cannot kill. And this, in and of itself, is one of the most important things to have on this team, because stuff like Qwilfish, for example, would normally be a humongous problem for, say, Aggron or even Poliwrath by itself. But because of Substitute and Bulk Up, Qwilfish can't touch you, and you can eventually wear it down with Waterfall. Or another physically defensive Pokemon like Tangela can be Toxic and therefore worn down, or something like Pyukumuku, which can't do anything when you're behind a sub, but will ignore all your stat boosts. You can Toxic it and wear it down. So this is why the set is particularly important, and one of the most important things to have on this particular set, because you need something to wear down opponents, and you need something that's going to survive and boost to basically make yourself unable to be killed by stall teams. So we're going to need leftovers on the set to recover a little bit of HP at every turn. This set by itself, though, is very good, and it's something that I would like to encourage you all to try on other teams, because Poliwrath can just do this very, very well like no other Pokemon in PU. It's not perfect, it's not amazing, it's not always going to work, but the combination of moves on this particular set is exactly what this team needed to deal with a lot of the things that were shutting it down on my opponent's team. So with all 6 of these Pokemon in mind, I want to encourage you all to give this team a shot. I'm going to post a link to the paste bin of it, or whatever you need to copy and paste this into Pokemon Showdown so you can try it yourself. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll be posting some battle videos in the near future showcasing this team for you all to see. So as always, thank you all for watching, everybody. Take care, goodbye, and I will see you all next time.